Hello, this video is about Polar Light's 1/350th scale Klingon Battle Cruiser from Star Trek the Motion Picture. The kit is actually called Klingon Katinga class Battle Cruiser blah 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 AMAR. Anyway, it's the Klingon ship that you see at the beginning of Star Trek the Motion Picture. I'd had the AMT kit from 1979, I guess, which was good, seemed good at the time. This is about twice the size. It's huge, which is great. I think one of the things that's kind of important in a model is it's got to kind of convey the feeling of the thing. So these Star Trek ships that are enormous, you need to have a good sized kit, and this thing is big and chunky and really kind of just sets the scene. And it's beautifully engineered. Anyone who struggled through those kits and trying to get the neck on and the right angle and all that stuff, just like snaps together. And you famous last words, can't go wrong. I found it an absolute joy to work on this thing and put it all together. It was great. The only real area where I had some issues was the what I call the engines. I think they're actually the phaser blasters, but anyway, the two things that drop down at the end of the wings. They had a little bit of ambiguity, but otherwise it just went together like a dream. Great looking kit. It does have a lighting option, and I wasn't going to go with that because A, it's expensive. B, it's not a particularly lit model. It's not like the Enterprise has, the glowing warp engines and the self-illumination and all that. So I thought I could do a pretty good representation of it without going there. Couple of things I did do was, again, if you remember the 1979 AMT kits, they had what they called rainbow effect decals that were these kind of like shimmery, iridescent, metallic stickers that you put on the warp engines of the Enterprise, and I think you had a couple on the Klingon ship. So what I did was sort of on the engines on the back. I got some of that paper, that reflective paper from an art store, and put that in there. And then the transparencies that you get, I just went over that very lightly with wet and dry paper, just to kind of give it a slight sort of frosting. And then, just sort of glued that in place. I did cover every contour, so like the back, the sides, the top, the bottom of that area, so that it was kind of whatever angle you looked at it from, you'd kind of see that red, or it would be there. And then I did the same thing for the big grill on the top, whatever that thing is on top, reactor. I did the same thing in there where you can see it through the grill. There's a concaved sort of cyclorama of the red, so you can pretty much from any angle you look through there, you'll see it. And again, it's not lighting. It sounds worse than it looks, but because it does have this sort of iridescent quality, if you look at it from slightly different angles, it kind of gives a sort of shimmery, glowy. It's just reflective. It just really kind of reflects out and gives you that idea that there's something in there. For painting the ship, it's got a great texture to it. It's got a slightly grainy texture, and I just I was planning on airbrushing the whole thing just because there's so much beautiful little detail on there. I didn't want to lose that. I'm not very skilled with an airbrush, so it's something I was going to do reluctantly, or this was going to be a good way to learn. But I brush painted just a quick coat just to check some sanding I'd done, and the paint covered so well, so thinly, and looked so good. I thought, okay, this could work for the whole thing. So that's what I ended up doing. It's all brush painted with Vallejo paints, Vallejo acrylic, which I'm just getting used to. I used to be a humble enamels person for years, but I think between the fumes and it gets a bit old. And also just once you start with these things, there's sort of no going back. There's no going back for me. These paints are just incredible. Anyway, I gave it a coat of neutral gray, which looked good, but I thought it was a little warm. And maybe some of that is because you only see these that one time in Star Trek the Motion Picture, and they're approaching the Vija cloud, which is blue, so that probably gives them a bit more of a blue hue. But anyway, that's the only time you see them, and I wanted to go for something that looked like what we've seen on screen. I should also mention at this point, all the paint guides for the kit have it in shades of green. Apparently the original studio model, or the studio models they used, were green or had a green hue to them. But if you watch the movie, they're grey, silvery grey, blue grey, grey. Couple of shots certainly have green panels on there, especially there's a close-up shot of one of the engines going by, which I think is a larger scale model, and you can see some sort of blue, greeny panels on that. But you look at the stills on the box and it's green, and you watch the movie and it's grey. So I'm building a model of a futuristic, 24th century giant spaceship, which when you've seen it on the screen is grey. If I was building a model of, the 4-foot long miniature that was used to create those shots, maybe I'd make it green and all the rest of it. But how it appears on film is what I wanted it to look like. So yeah, I gave it a coat of neutral grey to start off with, and that looked pretty good, but as I said, a bit warm. So then I went out and got some additional Vallejo colors. Oh, I didn't go out, I had it sent to me because we can't go out. And the bulk of it was done in this color I found called intermediate blue. And I was kind of guessing, I'm ordering these offline, and I just got myself a sort of a variety of things that, on the website look like the right colors. So it's intermediate blue, gray blue, pastel blue, and then, as I said, the bulk of it is the intermediate blue, and then it's got different sort of raised areas picked out in the lighter and darker colors. The base color, the intermediate blue, was pretty much as dark as I wanted to go for the most part, so I was lifting the color up a bit with the panels and following again as much as I could what you see in the film. And again, you don't get any views of the bottom the bottom of the ship in the film, so you have to sort of use a bit of artistic license there. But yeah, so we can have a little bit of fun with it. I tried not to be too contrasty, because again they do seem pretty much one color. So I picked out the panels and had a few iterations before I kind of got what I thought the balance seemed right in terms of different panels. Once I had that done, I put the decals on. It is a bumpy surface, so I did use microsol or microset, which I'd used recently with some really old transfers from the 1970s on a Spitfire I was making, and that was sort of my first time with it, and it was again an hallelujah moment of wow, these things are great. So I put a bunch on. So I used that for the decals on this, and they really go down perfectly over the contour. So that was good. And then I went and added a lot of sort of shaded paneling on there. When you look at the ships in the movie, certainly, the famous shot where it comes forward and goes underneath the camera, and the camera rotates around it, which is excellent. You can see some sort of, what I would call Space 1999 or sort of, Gerry Anderson sort of sprayed paneling, very subtle. And it also has some other sort of more flush paneling, which I did with lighter and darker shades, and just rubbing a cotton bud with a little bit of paint over the edge of a post-it note, just to kind of get the sharp edge and then the smear. And again, it's very, very subtle. These don't have that kind of, there's a different look to the Star Trek models, and certainly this Klingon model than the Star Wars stuff or the Gerry Anderson stuff that's seen before. So I sort of I trod very carefully with how much of that I did. I wanted to put it on there because it is on the actual models when you see them, but it's very subtle. The other thing I did was I did cut out a few very small panels. I painted some Scotch tape, light grey, dark grey, slightly different shades, ever so slightly different than the colours on the hull, and then cut those out into sort of triangles or angled shapes matching that kind of geometric sort of idea that's on the rest of the hull, and then cut these out and then just rubbed them down onto the hull, so they're almost flush, but they stick out just that little bit. And again, they're sort of clean edge shapes, and there's quite a lot of these on the ship. I think it looks like there's something like this on the ship, but it was just a lot easier to do it that way than mask things off and try and paint them. And you could just layer things a bit better. I could layer things a little bit better than I would have been able to do. So a number of different sort of things done, there. In terms of the windows, which there are many, mostly on the head. So for those windows, I got a bunch of tiny, actually 4mm railway lettering transfers that come in white. The ones I got were from the Historical Model Railway Society, and they're 4mm, which is maybe, I don't know, HO scale, but whatever. It's basically a decal sheet that has all sorts of lettering and numbers and little arrows and commas and punctuation. And I've sort of used this idea before on other models using Letraset, rub down. But because there was hard to get a good flat surface where you could actually get in there and do a rub down transfer, I couldn't do it on the Klingon ship. If you look at it where the windows are, they're kind of in a trough or a channel, and it's really hard to get in there. Anything that had like a horizontal or a spherical or square shape, and use those for the windows. And then just looking at stills from the film, I sort of put in the white ones where they would go, and the black ones I did with black transfers, and you know, and painted some of the windows in darker. The thing that was a selling point for me was that there'll be totally sharp edge. There'd be, you know, straight and, you know, right angled and sort of crisp, which painting, certainly for me, you know, wouldn't have come out as well. So putting these things on there worked out pretty well. And then once they were all on, and I could look at the whole thing, I went and dry brushed lightly over some of them, just with a sort of a black, or I think maybe grey, just to dull some of them down so they're not all exactly the same brightness, because on the real ships, obviously, there's, you know, a light on in the captain's quarters, and the one room next door doesn't have a light, and the one next to that, you know, is picking up a bit of ambient light from the hallway, or whatever it is. You just want to have a bit of variety in those lights. And then I gave it a coat of, you know, it was all in acrylic paint, so I gave it a coat of enamel humble matte spray, just to kind of unify the whole thing. It's got a little bit of a sheen on it, which I liked, because again, looking at the models in the look at the real ships in the movie, they have a bit of a sheen as well. I did have a lot of stills that I took off the screen to kind of check, you know, certainly on the bridge area where the different panels are different colors and some of that detail, as much as, you know, I could without going too crazy. I just love this design, and I'd heard a lot of good stuff about the kit, and it sort of pretty much lived up to all of it. I think there are some details it probably could have had in a couple of areas. I added a few little things to the engines, just tiny little sort of greebly things, just to kind of, you know, bring that up a little bit. Mostly because there is that shot in the movie where there's one of the engines passes right by camera, and I think it's a larger scale model just of that piece of it, and there's so much detail on there. So I wanted to try and, you know, imply some of that without going too nuts. And that's it. Otherwise, it's all just, you know, out of the box build. There's a resin on top of the bridge that they give you with the kit, which I didn't use. I used the plastic one. I couldn't see a huge difference. I think it's a little shallower, maybe. But I went with the other one because it just seemed to have better locating pins, and I didn't want it to be crooked in any way. And I think that's it. So thanks for watching. If you have any questions, please post them below. And if you like this video, please come back. There'll be some more on other topics shortly. So thanks very much. Bye-bye.